And now, deep thoughts with the old man. Why are there 6 of them in the first place? I wonder if sapient pugs could be good sailors. What if the aliens are watching this? Did the wife leave the stove on? 6 pugs in little sailor outfits. Matt for the molding in here? Yep, Matt. Obligatory Rome thought of the hour. Pringles are the superior potato chip. Pugs in togas. I'm gonna be a neckbeard if I don't shave. I need a razor. Are the aliens watching this now? How do you bend the barrel of a Bradley? Am I why they don't speak to us? I'm definitely the reason they're not speaking to us. Pugs in sailor outfits chasing aliens. Why is the light on? War pugs. In every instance where Napoleon tried to seize his ambitions across Europe, there was a constant enemy, a historical enemy, that being Britain. Now, there were several wars where the entire continent almost was trying to fight back against France and Napoleon. And I always find it a bit, now it doesn't stop me from making the French jokes, but at the same time, if you went back as far as we are separated from World War II and made the same jokes about the French military and being prone to surrender, you know, during Napoleon's era, they would have stared at you like you had grown a second head. The French land military, I'm an idiot. The French army was quite simply put almost unstoppable for just a long period of time. And they consistently beat the brakes off of everyone that they fought. Austria had to sign so many treaties, which they subsequently broke just about every single time. Like, Austria was losing entire generations to Napoleon. It was ridiculous how many times he just beat the brakes off the entire continent. But there was one enemy that always stood in his way, and eventually it was like they were a very, very large part of the reason that Napoleon finally bit off more than he could chew. And that was Old Britannia. Now, you could say that Napoleon should have tried harder to invade, he should have tried harder to invade Britain, but he didn't really have a chance to, because his navy and the Spanish navy got absolutely pasted at the Battle of Trafalgar, which pretty much cemented England as the world's preeminent military power on the seas. There was no contesting that anymore. They had, for a while, been considered one of the top, but Trafalgar really cemented them in place. And even though Admiral Nelson died during that, I mean, talk about a legend. There are some battles in history that are just, if you know anything about, if you opened a history book at some point in your life, you've heard about them. Hastings, Trafalgar being one of them, Waterloo. God, now my brain is doing a thing where it doesn't want to remember. It happens like that sometimes, and it drives me nuts. I seriously need some B vitamins, because I'm trying to think of one right now, and it is just abandoning ship. But it was, oh my God. I cannot, I'm seriously just about to beat myself, just incredibly hard, because for some strange reason, my brain couldn't remember the name Agincourt. Warpugs, like I say that, and then I actually forgot how to pronounce. I actually forgot the name of the Battle of Agincourt. Gettysburg, Battle of the Bulge, the Somme. All of these, Verdun. There are just some battles that live on in history as examples of insane heroism and turning points. Now, I could list off a couple of other names that just popped into my head when I was trying to think of Agincourt, Stalingrad being one of them, of course, but we're here to talk about the Napoleonic era. And we're here to talk about why Napoleon never invaded Britain, and what if he actually had succeeded? Because if he succeeded at Trafalgar, there was not much that was going to stop him from invading Britain. We're going to move past this. I'm going to check this out. This is by Alternate History Hub, of course, probably one of the best, if not the best, alternate history creators on the entire platform. Let's get into this. I have been a fan of this channel for a very, very long time. And, well, now that I am thoroughly beating myself up in my own head, let's get into this. Warpugs, all links are going to be in the description down below. If you haven't subscribed to Alternate History Hub yet, what are you waiting for? There is a absolute plethora of just amazing scenarios that he has covered throughout the years. And I'm actually surprised that he has not covered this one. Let's get into it.
The Battle of Trafalgar, the last great naval engagement in the Age of Sail. The battle that ended Napoleon's dreams of conquering his greatest foe. Britannia ruled the waves, and since he was unable to bring it under his boot, Napoleon opted for the continental system, a petty system of alliances aimed at crippling its economy via sanctions. It was this system that eventually drove the Grand Armée to invade Russia, and we all know how that little adventure ended up.
Yeah.
England's industrial might allowed it to pull in America and possess a larger fleet than the next 10 powers combined. So, when the Franco-Spanish fleets attempted to unite, Admiral Nelson was ordered to chase them down across the Atlantic and ensure it went nowhere except the bottom of the ocean. After the Atlantic wild chase, the fleet was spotted near Cadiz in an attempt to cross Gibraltar. So, the one-armed hero shadowed its movements, making sure it was far enough from an Allied harbor before he made his move. But on the 21st of October, 1805, his ships were spotted, and the Franco-Spanish fleet under Admiral Villeneuve attempted to escape back to Cadiz, despite their numerical superiority. Due to the skill of the recruits and the nature of the command, the fleet lost all cohesion and failed to form a line. Meanwhile, an anxious and eager Nelson broke with tradition and ordered his fleet to engage head-on, instead of the usual let's line up and fire till one of us sinks tactic of the day. I mean, if that's what you can even call a tactic.
Infantry tactics in that time period were so, like, if you were teleported back to that time period, you were expected to stand in a line and maintain discipline while hundreds, if not thousands of people were shooting in your direction. And you were supposed to stand at attention and wait for commands and not flinch and run while literal hell is erupting all around you. Dude, these people were built different.
Despite the surprisingly slow winds, which turned the HMS Victory into a sitting duck, the British didn't just prevail, they annihilated the Franco-Spanish fleet and managed to capture the majority of their ships of the line. Nelson lost his life pulling off the maneuver, but in return, Napoleon lost his hope of ever planting a French flag on the Tower of London. But what if Trafalgar went the other way? Could a reverse Normandy ever be pulled off? If so, how far would Napoleon go? Alright, Jimmy, I know you're not going to believe this, but exactly 10 days after you picked this scenario to win, the great people over at Wargaming contacted me and offered to sponsor this video.
Nice.
But this isn't your typical World of Warships ad. Oh no, this is a match made in heaven. While France once controlled all of Europe, a century later, Europe came back for France, and now you can relive the D-Day that did happen. Join the battle on the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings, and engage in epic naval warfare as you relive history's most pivotal moment on the seas. Participate in exclusive in-game events, unlock commemorative rewards, and pay homage to those who changed the course of history. Unlock completely new ships and historical commanders as you dive into the special D-Day PvE and PvP missions. What's more, by signing up with this exclusive link, you will get a ton of doubloons and credits, special D-Day missions, and
I got a feeling we missed this one. I really got a feeling we missed this one.
a choice of 5 incredible ships. Imagine Nelson himself witnessing the might of World War II era ships, or Napoleon loading up his army on one. Quite the thought. Thank you to Wargaming for being today's sponsor. Now let's get back to the video. So this scenario won by a landslide.
What if India was an island? What if West and East Rome united in 800? That would... There was too much that was going on. What if Napoleon invaded England? Of course, we're checking out that one. What if Russia won the Russia-Japanese? That's even more unlikely than West and East Rome. Russia was an absolute dumpster fire. What if the Ottomans lost at Gallipoli? Aussie.
In the previous community poll. And to do it justice, I called in my friend Emperor Tigerstar to help me try out something new. Instead of looking at the overall big picture and aftermath, let's seriously dig into this.
Okay.
Let's try a realistic, yet alternative, Napoleonic campaign. I'm talking boots on the ground, week by week, logistics, engagements, troop numbers, and defenses. That requires a lot of research.
Yeah.
Luckily, many of you signed up for the Napoleon's Gambit Discord event and wrote a ton of wonderful essays that helped with this video. Special shout out to the top 3 writers on each side.
That's
who
cool.
Saved me a lot of time in the Napoleonic rabbit holes. Alright, so let's start at the point of divergence itself. How does the legendary admiral lose Trafalgar? Simple. Ever since ancient times, naval battles tend to be winner takes all, an all or nothing gambit where retreat is not really an option. You rarely see an engagement which ends up in a stalemate, and more often than not, experimental tactics like that of Nelson end in failure. What helped him here was the fact that the Franco-Spanish fleet failed to form a cohesive line. But what if in this timeline they did? Suddenly, the decision to advance on a numerically superior foe who could fire freebies at you while you advance turns into a horrible idea. Worst of all, Nelson led from the front, and he would be the first ship to sink, sending a wave of panic throughout the rest of the Royal Fleet's ships. From this point on, they could choose to either turn back, advance, or resort to traditional tactics a little too late. In all 3 of those scenarios, the British fleet is obliterated, with some ships even surrendering to the enemy. Instantly, Britain would lose its best admiral and half of its first-rate ships. But that doesn't mean London would fall the next day.
No.
So what would happen? Well, Jimmy, time to find out. The Battle of Trafalgar was fought just a day after Napoleon executed the Ulm maneuver on the 20th of October, 1805. But why is that memorable? Well, because 23,000 Austrians were captured, bringing the total number of prisoners to 60,000.
Remember what I said about him pasting the Austrians?
Within a month, Napoleon captured Vienna, but all of this paled in comparison to what he was about to do in December. Despite what the recent movie by Ridley Scott would have you believe, Austerlitz was not fought over a frozen lake.
Austerlitz, when I saw how they were going to portray Austerlitz, I was a little bit upset. But this was, if you want to watch a historically accurate movie that is actually pretty good, The Russians made the best one. Watch Waterloo. You will thank me. It is old, it is dated, but there's no CGI, there's no nothing like that. All the extras in the movie are military personnel, and they agonized over historical accuracy. It is a long film. It is highly recommended.
In fact, most of that movie is Hollywood at its worst.
Yes, it is.
Woof. What's so sad about that is this really was Napoleon's magnum opus, a battle in which his tactical genius decimated the combined Austro-Russian armies and solidified himself as one of the best generals in history. He had many great victories before and after Austerlitz, but this was his masterpiece. The War of the Third Coalition was over, the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved, and Napoleon was free to finally look beyond the channel. And now you'll finally get a chance, little guy. Ever since he got back from his campaign, Napoleon continued his postponed invasion. A year prior, he had selected 200,000 troops, stationing them at Boulogne, before he had to fight Austria. The drills would continue as supplies were stockpiled, and the fleet was being repaired. The French had a larger force, more experience, and used a meritocratic system which saw the best officers being promoted. Britain, on the other hand, followed a more traditional military chain of command, where men were promoted based on seniority. Thanks to the report made in 1805, we know the exact number of troops guarding the Isles.
Oh my god.
As you can see, it's not even close.
Wait, let's back that up and take a look at those numbers. So Napoleon was sending 200,000. They had almost 60,000 to guard to guard Great Britain. Oh my god, they would have been way outnumbered. They had a decent amount of militia, but militia wouldn't stand up against the Grand Armée. Even with everything that they had, if they gathered every single troop between Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and they still wouldn't have, they still wouldn't even matched up.
I mean, sure, the equipment of the British was marginally better both in terms of firearms and artillery, and their dragoons were to be feared. But should the Grand Armée make its way onto the flat fields of England, the Brits are toast.
Yeah.
Thing is, they already knew that. That's why they spend a fortune building up their defenses. The no-brainer targets like Portsmouth, Hastings, and Dover were all armed to the teeth. We're talking giant Mortello towers spread across the coast, medieval castles refitted into powerful strongholds like Cowes, Deal, and Sandgate, an intricate chain of signal towers capable of instantly warning London of upcoming attacks, ripped straight out of Lord of the Rings. Then finally, you have the Royal Military Canal near Hastings. In typical British fashion, instead of erecting a wall, they dug a massive canal, 60 feet wide and 9 feet deep. This created an extra line of defense. All of this was done in our timeline, despite the Trafalgar win. But here, as soon as Parliament hears of Nelson's demise, these projects are upscaled and finished early. But let's not forget the most important line of defense at King George's disposal, the English Channel itself.
Yep.
In normal circumstances, the voyage from Boulogne to Hastings is no more than 8 hours. However, making such a trip in the winter is pretty much insanity. I even found this barometric pressure data report dating all the way back to 1748. And let me tell you, weather conditions around this time were bleak. Keep in mind that this only applies to the channel itself, meaning that Britain was free to recall some of its fleet scattered across the empire. So for the next 6 months, both sides had time to prepare for the clash of the century. While waiting for the Channel waters to calm, Napoleon appointed 2 of his marshals on a side quest, Marshal Davout and Marshal Soult. Both of them had distinguished themselves at the Battle of...
This looks like a before and after for a Rogaine. I'm just saying. Keeps. There you go.
themselves at the Battle of Austerlitz and unlike other commanders, were perfectly capable of leading an army on their own. Known for their aggressive and fast-paced tactics, they are the perfect choice to lead the Irish rebellion that was brewing. You see, if you didn't know, Ireland's never been the biggest fan of British rule.
No.
But with the last couple of years in particular, discontent grew into violence. The 1798 and 1803 rebellions in particular provided a window of opportunity for the French. And so on the 5th of March 1806, a portion of the French Armada makes its way to the western coast of Ireland and splits in two. This armada was made up of 102 transport ships carrying 10,000 French troops, alongside 4 battalions of the Irish League. They were escorted by 67 warships, mostly frigates and smaller ships of the line. Marshal Davout landed in Ballybunion, while Soult assaulted Kilkenny. The signal towers were triggered, but by the time the British were aware of the invasion, the relatively small expeditionary force was already on their shores. The British, who were busy training thousands of recruits, building ships, and fortifying England, were caught off guard. The Royal Navy was dispatched, and General Ormsby Vandeleur was ordered to repel the invaders. Within 2 weeks, the French advanced on Limerick and Galway, with the local populace rallying behind them. France had sent 1,000 men 8 years earlier, but these troops, and the renown of their marshals, had lit a spark, a hope, for a free Irish state.
The Irish ever oh my god, the wars and rebellions and resentment would have, at the first hint that they could have been, it would have caused a major rebellion.
Both cities fell within days, and thanks to the location near the Golden Vale of Ireland, these two swift armies had enough provisions to last until the summer. By this point, Ormsby and the Navy were in position to challenge the French. The British force in Ireland prior to the invasion stood at 34,000 strong, with another 20,000 militia, but they were mostly garrisoned near Cork, Waterford, and Dublin. Ormsby had 26,000 men at his disposal, but he couldn't risk splitting his force as the French did. When given the dilemma on which front to focus on, he chose Galway, which would allow for supporting fire from the Royal Navy. But by the time he got there, Soult had already moved north, living off the land, and arming Irish rebels everywhere he went. This triggered a wave of panic, expressing itself in dozens of punitive raids against the Irish. Britain was more vulnerable than ever, and the traitors who sided with the French were hanged in the hundreds. Napoleon had started a guerrilla campaign in the British backdoor, forcing them to spend precious time and material chasing his 2 war dogs. At the end of March, Ormsby managed to capture an encrypted message. The text is relayed to codebreaks in Dublin, detailing Napoleon's orders to Davout to capture and hold Cork until late May, where the full invasion force would land.
Hooray!
In 1806, our dear King George III was, well, let's just say mentally unstable. And despite his
let's back it up a little bit. Backing it up. I want to read that. Oh, causing him to fall into the mouth and his whole voice become hoarse. He would frequently repeat himself and write sentences with over 400 words at a time, and his vocabulary became more complex, creative, and colorful. Possible symptoms of bipolar syndrome. Wow. Bipolar disorder. His doctors were largely at a loss to explain his illness, as per his stories by the spread, such as the claim that he had shaken hands with a tree in the mistaken belief it was the King of Prussia. Nice. Treatment for mental illness was primitive by modern standards. George's doctors, who included Francis Willis, treated the king by forcibly restraining him until he was calm, or applying caustic poultices to draw out evil humors. This is why the aliens won't talk to us.
And despite his proclamations that if Napoleon lands in England, he would meet him in battle, the real command is split between 2 men. General John Moore, the man who initiated the construction of the military canal and Martello Towers, and Prince Frederick, the Duke of York, a man mocked for his disastrous Flanders campaign. Since then, however, the Duke became commander-in-chief and
There
learned
you
from his
go.
mistakes, completely reorganizing and reforming the British Army. Upon breaking the message, Parliament immediately ordered them to prepare for the Irish invasion. Multiple squadrons were ordered to patrol the waters, and General David Dundas was transported directly to Cork at the head of 10,000 soldiers. Little did they know, this was all part of Napoleon's plan. While Soult continued to rampage through the Irish countryside, Devoe prepared to lay siege to Cork. However, this was all just a ruse. On June 6th, another expeditionary force, this time 26,000 strong, sailed from Boulogne to Eastbourne. Upon arrival, the French flagship Bucentaure fired down a massive barrage on the city's defenses. Napoleon had called upon the assistance of the Spanish, Dutch, and even Danish fleets to assist him. This was the real deal. Napoleon himself descended upon the battered city with his best troops, and within 6 hours of him sailing from France, he was finally on English soil. Admiral Collingwood raced to the landing site and clashed with the French Navy. However, their strategy was only to hold the Royal Navy at bay, buying time and then retreating back towards Calais. In the meantime, Bonaparte sent out another one of his trusted commanders to take Hastings. Marshal Ney took 6,000 men and headed east, while the rest of the army headed west. Napoleon always liked to study a battlefield days before a battle, and he knew that the English would not give up Brighton without a significant resistance. By the time of the attack, the British regulars were now close to 80,000, a quarter of which were cavalry, which can quickly react to the breach. Yet, most of the defenders were spread across a wide front, and nearly a third were back in Ireland. Brighton and Hastings were extremely well fortified, but the Duke of York knew they would always fail without reinforcements. Troops and ships from York were recalled, but before they could properly deploy, news arrived of another French drop. Hot air balloons were used to discover the movements of the Royal Navy, and
I can't argue with this.
several hours after it had passed by Dover, the French sprung into action. Marshal Murat and another 15,000 Frenchmen set sail from The Hague and landed at Great Yarmouth on June 18th. This
Great Yarmouth? Oh boy. Somebody tell Speaker D and the rest of the Hunter the Parenting crew that they've got some French visitors.
Buoyant cavalry commander was given free rein from Napoleon to raid as much of the Norfolk flatlands as he wished. Instead of directly attacking Norwich, he galloped through the English countryside, opening a new front. With 5 separate armies roaming the Isles, where exactly would you tell your navy to go, if say you were the one in charge of the defense? Do you prevent more reinforcements to join up with Napoleon? Do you protect the crucial coastline cities? What about another attack on Ireland, the Channel Islands, Cornwall? As you can see, this would be a nightmare for the crown. But there was a glimmer of hope. Hastings was on the brink, and right as it was about to surrender, John Moore arrived with 23,000 soldiers. Using the range superiority of his artillery, as well as the Royal Horse Artillery, he was able to surround the 6,000 men led by Ney and obliterate them. The brave marshal fought until the end, but ultimately, he failed as emperor. Upon receiving news of this counterattack, Napoleon ordered his men to move against Brighton. The signal towers were lit, and the Royal Navy was ordered to assist the siege. And that is when the French Navy ferried yet another army into the fray. This time,
this is the problem with trying to defend an area this vast. You really just can't do it with like any hope of just real success, because the second that you try, what's that statement, a man who defends everything defends nothing, it's very apt here. All one would have to do is just continuously launch smaller attacks to eventually overwhelm, cause confusion. It's perfect.
it was at Bernadotte, with 24,000 men who sailed from Calais to Ramsgate. Without a navy to resist him, the Marshal was able to take the landing and immediately marched against Dover Castle, taking a sandwich and a deal along the way. Lastly, the final hand Napoleon had to play was overwhelming the already stretched thin Royal Navy by sending not one, but 2 separate fleets transporting 10,000 men each from Brest. Britain had the capability to protect Cork, lay down supporting fire on Brighton, blockade the coast to prevent supplies from aiding the armies already in England, and prevent more armadas from sailing in, but it couldn't do all of that at the same time.
Right.
So when the towers made their signal, only one of the fleets could be intercepted in time. Okay, pause. I was trying to analyze wind patterns and garrison sizes to figure out which would get intercepted, but screw it. Let's do a coin toss.
Let's go. That
Tails.
works.
While the fleet aiming for Weymouth does arrive at its destination, the one gunning for Milford is completely annihilated. In an attempt to cut off the head of the snake, the Duke of York rode out to meet Napoleon with an army twice his size, sealing the fate of Dover, which Bernadotte managed to take. Elsewhere, Murat and the Irish rebels made enormous gains, putting pressure on Parliament. The French landings made too many casualties, but luckily for them, a man by the name of Dominique Larrey was among them. The father of modern military medicine learned much during the previous campaigns, especially the one in Egypt, and his reforms made the French army leagues ahead of its competition. Disease prevention, bandaging, amputation, triage, ambulances, all contributed to something the rest of the world would adopt 50 years later.
Yeah.
Despite being the attacker, Napoleon sustained 3 times fewer casualties as a result of these improvements and their experience.
So many troops during this time period were just simply lost due to infection, due to camp diseases. Like, the amount of soldiers that died due to these issues was outrageous. And things like this just kept on, like, building up and building up. Most of the casualties that happened in warfare were not so much from the combat itself, but all the after effects of it.
With Brighton under blockade and with an army fast approaching, Bonaparte took 15,000 men and occupied the hills to the east. In this fateful encounter, the Emperor fought the Duke at the Battle of Brighton, adding another masterpiece to his resume. The crucial moment of the battle was Marshal Lannes charging through the British right flank, breaking their lines. While the French artillery bombarded the center, Napoleon then made his way west and captured Portsmouth after a 2-week siege, while the rest of his generals secured the coastline all the way up to Dover. The Martello Towers were captured, and now with such a vast front, the French sailed through a single day and delivered 80,000 troops safely to England. The unstopping avalanche made its way to London, smashing everything in its path, loudly proclaiming that Napoleon was here, not as a conqueror, but a liberator, ready to strip the aristocracy down and finally give freedom to the people.
Yay!
No matter how much aid arrived from the Empire, London was doomed, and with it, its most important institutions, Parliament, the Bank of England, the headquarters of the East India Company, and all of Westminster. A vote was made, and rather than seeing it all burn to ash, envoys were sent to Napoleon to receive terms. Within a couple of months, Bonaparte became the unquestioned Emperor of Europe, and the French flag flew over the Tower of London. Similarly to his terms to Austria, he chose to be modest in his demands. Gibraltar was handed to the Spanish. Malta became French. A permanent French garrison was posted at Dover, and the majority of the British possessions in the Caribbean were given over to France. Ireland was given full independence, and the Australian penal colonies were transferred to Napoleon, who was fascinated by the new continent. But how long does this situation endure before the next coalition? What is the reaction of Prussia, Russia, and Jefferson's America? Well, by now you know the drill. when the sequel poll drops, make sure to vote if you want a continuation of this timeline. Once again, a huge thanks to everyone who took part in the Discord community event and helped me with this video.
Very
If you
nice.
haven't already, make sure to check out my Patreon, where I post monthly exclusive videos now on topics picked by the patrons. There's like 4 videos there already. Trust me, they're really cool. Once again, be sure to check out today's sponsor, World of Warships. There are only a few days left until the end of their special D-Day event, so use the link in the description and join the fray. I played a few battles to get me in the mood for this video, and I have to say that the historical accuracy of the ships and combat really immerses you in the past.
Boom boom.
This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
So, the one thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier was the amount of times that Austria got pasted by France. And Napoleon was always very, very reasonable with his terms. And every single time, Austria would go back and then in a few years would break its treaty. It almost became comical just how many times Austria broke treaties they had signed with Napoleon. Now, with this situation, I mean, the France beating Britain, France forcing Britain into capitulation. I'm not sure that it could have really done anything to actually make the situation any worse overall. The sheer fact of the matter would be that Britain would not be able, with the French garrison, they would not be able to actually contribute in a large way to subsequent coalition battles and endeavors. They just wouldn't be able to do it. And in that regard, to be quite honest with you, Napoleon wins. Napoleon wins outright. And I don't see anything really toppling him from power at that point, because they had tried for years, and it was only just the series of unending wars, mostly funded by the British purse, that led to Napoleon's eventual defeat. But that's neither here nor there. Warpugs, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'm gonna head out from here. I hope you guys have a great day. Check all the links in the description below for myself, for Alternate History Hub, and I will catch you guys next time. Short man syndrome, they call Napoleon syndrome. Napoleon was the average height for his time.